The scream that tore through our neighborhood that night was the kind you never forget, the sound of electricity crackling against flesh, the gut-wrenching cry of my father hitting the ground as his body convulsed. The fake HOA thug stood over him, taser still humming, while Karen, puffed up with self-importance, barked orders like a general in her twisted war against common sense. "That's what happens when you ignore HOA directives," she screeched, her voice splitting the night air. Neighbors froze on their porches, horrified but too stunned to move. My blood went cold as I watched the man who raised me, an Army veteran, turned quiet rhetoric shaking on the pavement, while this woman laughed as if she'd just won a game. I wanted to rush in, fists flying, but my dad's eyes sharp even through the pain locked on mine. That look wasn't just fear, it was a warning. And then I remembered the part Karen and her hired goons could never have known. My dad wasn't just a veteran. He was a retired FBI unit leader with friends who had once stormed mob hideouts and taken down international syndicates. Karen had just picked a fight with a man whose phone contacts included federal agents who didn't mess around. The day had started with Karen slipping fake notices into our mailbox, printed on cheap letterhead claiming new HOA safety fines. The scam was obvious, but she strutted door to door, bluffing neighbors into paying cash. My dad confronted her in the cul-de-sac, his voice calm, firm, telling her she had no legal ground. Instead of backing down, she brought muscle to burly men in fake uniforms, black polos with HOA enforcement embroidered like a bad prop. When Dad refused to hand over money, one of them pulled out the taser. The zap came fast, brutal, and the sight of him hitting the ground will forever be burned into me. But Karen had no clue that Dad's FBI brothers still watched out for him. My mom, hands trembling but steady enough, dialed a number that wasn't 911. Within minutes, an unmarked SUV turned the corner, tires screeching as men in tactical gear poured out. You could almost see the color drain from Karen's face when she realized these weren't just local deputies. These were the kind of agents whose badges carried national weight. One of them, Special Agent Morris, strode straight to my father's side, helping him up while glaring at the thugs. "What the hell did you just do?" he demanded. The taser thug, suddenly meek, stammered about HOA law enforcement rights, but Morris barked a laugh so cold it made the entire crowd shiver. "HOA law enforcement? That's not a thing. You just assaulted a federal officer in retirement, on federal protected property. Do you even understand what kind of hole you've dug yourselves into?" Karen tried to recover, shrieking about how she was the president and that these rules are binding. But Agent Morris raised a hand, and another agent pulled out a thick folder. Inside were weeks of quietly collected complaints, surveillance photos, even bank records showing Karen siphoning funds from her bogus HOA dues. Turns out my father had quietly been building a case before this night, suspecting she'd go too far. The taser incident wasn't just an attack. It was the final nail in the coffin. And then came the twist that made every jaw in the cul-de-sac drop. One of the fake enforcers, the one who hadn't fired the taser, suddenly ripped off his polo, tossing it on the ground. "I can't do this anymore," he shouted. "She promised us cash, said it was just intimidation. I didn't sign up for this." He pointed straight at Karen. "She told us to hurt him if he didn't pay. She said nobody would dare call the cops because she controlled the neighborhood." Karen's shriek was primal, a sound of someone realizing her empire was collapsing in real time. Neighbors gasped, cell phones recording every second, the internet already salivating for this level of scandal. Within minutes, Karen was in handcuffs, mascara streaked down her cheeks, shouting nonsense about neighborhood order as agents read her the charges: conspiracy, assault on a federal officer, fraud, impersonation of law enforcement. The thug who confessed was taken aside, treated as a cooperating witness, while the one who pulled the trigger was shoved into the back of a cruiser, his face pale as chalk. My dad, bruised but standing tall, adjusted his jacket and gave Karen a look so sharp it silenced her rambling. "You thought I was weak because I hung up my badge," he said, his voice steady but thunderous. "But what you don't understand is that justice doesn't retire." The neighborhood erupted in cheers as Karen was driven away, her reign of intimidation shattered in one electrified moment. News vans caught the scene live, the headline blazing across the screen before midnight. Fake HOA president arrested after FBI sting residents freed from years of extortion. People who had cowered under her fake fines came forward with their stories, their voices stronger now that they knew they weren't alone. And my father, though sore and scarred from the taser burn, became something more than just a retired agent. He became the symbol of what it meant to stand tall even when every bully in the world tried to drag you down. The irony was bitter and perfect all at once. Karen thought violence and lies would cement her power, but all it did was open the door to the very system she could never escape. And as our street lit up with laughter and relief that night, one thing became clear: she had tasered the wrong man. And in doing so, she shocked herself right out of her own empire. Do you think Karen's downfall was pure justice? Or do you believe she deserved even harsher punishment for the pain she caused? The trial drew headlines across the state, the kind of story that makes evening news anchors lean forward with furrowed brows and a touch of disbelief in their tone. A so-called HOA president who had ordered thugs to impersonate law enforcement, who had stolen thousands in fake dues, who had tasered a retired FBI unit leader. It sounded like a plotline out of a crime drama, not something from a suburban cul-de-sac. Yet there she was, Karen, bloated with arrogance 1 month earlier, now shackled and dragged into a county courthouse under federal custody. The prosecution didn't even need to embellish. The evidence was devastating. Video footage captured by neighbors showed her directing the attack. Bank records traced HOA funds to her personal accounts, financing vacations and luxury handbags. And the damning confession of the thug who flipped, testifying that she had instructed them to make an example of my father, stripped her bare of any defense. Karen's lawyer tried the usual tricks: stress, misunderstanding, community tensions as an excuse for violence. But every argument collapsed under the weight of the facts. And when my father took the stand, the room fell silent. He walked with a limp from the lingering effects of the taser, but his voice was strong, his words steady. He told the jury how he had confronted violent men in alleys, terrorists in bunkers, cartel smugglers at border crossings, but never, in all his years of service, had he seen corruption as shameless as what Karen brought to a neighborhood of ordinary families. His testimony wasn't about himself. It was about the mothers afraid to let their children ride bikes because Karen patrolled like a dictator, about the retirees who handed over cash just to avoid harassment, about the quiet erosion of freedom under one woman's fabricated authority. The twist came mid-trial, when the FBI revealed that Karen's scam wasn't confined to our neighborhood. She had created a network of satellite HOAs, fake shells across 3 counties where she and her inner circle extracted thousands through false fines and bogus code enforcement. She wasn't just a nuisance, she was the hub of an organized crime ring hiding behind the image of neighborhood management. The courtroom buzzed as agents presented the maps, the bank ledgers, the paper trail that tied it all together. The judge's gavel slammed, demanding order, but nothing could stop the shock wave of realization. Karen's face, once smug, now twisted with horror. She tried to interrupt, shouting about conspiracies, blaming neighbors, even accusing my father of setting her up. But the judge silenced her with a glare. The jury had seen enough. They returned the verdict in less than an hour. Guilty on all charges: fraud, assault on a federal officer, impersonation of law enforcement, racketeering. Sentencing day was the final chapter of her fall. The courtroom was packed, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, a community united not in fear, but in hope. The judge's words were scalding. You wielded power that was never yours to wield. You sowed fear where there should have been trust. You assaulted a man whose life was dedicated to justice. This court will ensure you never again have the chance to abuse those around you. He handed down a sentence of 20 years in federal prison, with restitution to every victim her scams had touched. Gasps filled the air, then applause. For once, justice didn't just whisper, it roared. Karen collapsed in her chair, sobbing, mascara streaking like black rivers down her cheeks. Deputies cuffed her, pulled her to her feet, and dragged her out of the room as she wailed about betrayal and injustice. But no one believed her anymore. The tyrant of our neighborhood had been exposed as nothing more than a criminal in a business suit. The weeks that followed brought a transformation that still makes me choke up when I think about it. Without Karen's grip, the false HOA dissolved. Families gathered again, planning block parties instead of whispering about fines. Kids drew chalk murals across sidewalks without fear of being screamed at. Retirees planted gardens, neighbors opened porches, and the cul-de-sac finally felt like home. My father became something of a local hero, though he brushed it off. "I didn't take down Karen," he'd say, sipping coffee on the porch. "The truth did. All I did was stand up long enough for everyone else to see it." But the community thought differently. At the first neighborhood meeting after the trial, people voted unanimously to dedicate a small park bench in his honor, with a plaque that read, "Justice never retires." The most moving moment came when the thug who confessed showed up at our door weeks later. He wasn't in jail, thanks to his cooperation, but he was a broken man, ashamed of what he'd done. My father listened quietly as he apologized, voice shaking, eyes wet. Then, to my surprise, Dad extended his hand. "You made a choice to come clean," he said. "Don't waste that chance. Make the rest of your life worth something." That moment taught me more about grace than any sermon ever could. Looking back now, I realize Karen's downfall wasn't just about one woman's greed. It was about the strength of a community that had been silenced and finally found its voice. It was about a man who spent his life chasing justice, refusing to bow even when his body was on the ground. And it was about the truth that bullies, no matter how loud or cruel, eventually collapse under the weight of their own lies. Karen thought a taser would silence my father. Instead, it sparked a fire that burned her empire to ashes. And in the end, the only thing she shocked was herself straight into the prison system where she belonged. So I ask you, was this the justice Karen deserved? Or do you believe her punishment should have been even harsher for the pain she inflicted on so many?